welcome to our English-speaking union happy hour, Shake Up Shakespeare with Carol Ann Lloyd. I'm Joshua Keppel Gonzalez, Director of Branch Services at the English-speaking Union of the United States. Today's happy hour is sponsored by the Central Pennsylvania branch of the ESU. As ideas for these lectures come from you, our members and viewers, please share any ideas or topics for an upcoming speaker using the survey that will appear at the end of our program this evening. Before we get into that program, I wanted to make a couple of quick technical announcements. After the presentation, we'll be holding a question and answer session. You can enter your questions into either the Q&A module or the chat module. Buttons to access both of these are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation. It doesn't have to be during the Q&A portion. We will get to questions in the order received. In addition, we will have some audience participation via polls for this happy hour. So be sure to participate in the polls when they appear on your screen during Carol Ann's presentation. Also, as a reminder, teachers can receive an hour of continuing education credit, but they need to stay until the end of the presentation. I also want to take a moment to recognize the branches with the most registered members for this event. We have the Atlanta, Central Florida, and New York branches. Now, to truly start us off today, I'd like to welcome the president of the ESU Central Pennsylvania branch and chairman of the ESU Happy Hour Committee, Karen Blair Brand. Karen?
Thanks, Josh. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our program today for the English-speaking union Happy Hour program by Carol Ann Lloyd, Shaking Up Shakespeare. Also wanted to just say a note that all of you make this program possible, your participation, but this also comes from our branches from around the country. And the initial idea came from a number of members from different branches from around the country, from the education committee, from our branch task force last year. And so all of you and all the committee members that are currently on the Happy Hour committee, everybody, not only your participation, but being engaged together in the difficult times we're in. This makes our program successful for not only our members, but our guests and friends of the ESU. Today we have the opportunity to give teachers credit for this 1-hour program that will be delivered by Carol Ann Lloyd. And I want to give Dr. Francine Endler our thank you. She's our current director of the Central Intermediate Unit 10 here in Central Pennsylvania, one of 29 intermediate units from our Pennsylvania Department of Education here in Pennsylvania. Through their efforts and their partnership with us, with the ESU Central Pennsylvania branch, and reciprocity, we're able to bring this program as a Act 48 continuing education credit. A little bit about Dr. Francine Endler. You can put her picture back up there. I'm not done yet, Josh. She served as assistant superintendent for the Hollidaysburg School District and worked there for over 21 years. She's a doctorate in educational leadership from Duquesne University. She received her certification from Indiana University of Pennsylvania as a guidance counselor, and she received her principal certification from St. Francis University, which is again one of our partners. She received her superintendent certification from Shippensburg University, another one of our partners. And she began her career in sociology from the University of Pittsburgh. She is a licensed professional counselor. And Francine has had a career leading, motivating, and directing others and building relationships. So thank you, Dr. Francine Endler, if you watch this again. And thank you, Central Intermediate Unit 10, for giving us this opportunity to bring credits to our teachers for programs like this. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce one of my board members for the Central Pennsylvania branch that knows Dr. Carol Ann Lloyd well, and that's Sue Biondo Hench. Sue Biondo Hench has been a Pennsylvania teacher for over 37 years in the Carlisle High School school district. And for her love of her students and of Shakespeare, Sue has founded in her high school the Shakespeare troupe and also the program called Page to Stage for Shakespeare. Sue was awarded in 2007 the Folger Shakespeare Stewart Award for innovative teaching. And Sue, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being part of the Shakespeare competition here in Central Pennsylvania for over 30 some years as a teacher and now as one of our board members for ESU. Take it away, Sue.
Sue, you are currently muted.
Yeah. How's that? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Quality professional development is a change maker. And again, thank you to Dr. Blair Brand and to Dr. Endler for providing this vibrant workshop and for the opportunity to access Act 48 credit for this afternoon's program. And as always, I want to thank the English Speaking Union for its impact on my students and on me. The English Speaking Union's Shakespeare competition has been one of several change makers in my teaching career, allowing students to dive into short pieces of text in ways that have transformed all of us as students and as people. In fact, preparation for the competition has developed clarity, stamina, poise, and humanity that carry over into our work and our lives beyond our sonnets and our monologues. This work is one of the reasons that I continue to volunteer after retirement with my co-teacher, Doug Hewlett. Another change maker in my life has been the Folger Shakespeare Library, which is where I first met Carol Ann one summer when I was on staff for teaching Shakespeare Institute. Carol Ann was the manager of visitor education at the Folger, and though I didn't work directly with her, I saw her daily. And what I noticed daily was her joy in Shakespeare, in education, and in people, and her joy in creating connections among them. Carol Ann understands and facilitates the power and the magic of this type of synergy. But it's been a while since that Folger summer, and knowing Carol Ann's passion for learning and growth, I knew that she hadn't been resting on past accomplishments, and I was right. Research and conversation quickly revealed that, among other things, Carol Ann has spoken about history and Shakespeare at such noteworthy institutions as the Smithsonian, the Royal Oak Foundation, H. Croft Hall, and OLLI, a lifelong learning program at George Mason University. And Carol Ann is also a member of the National Speakers Association. If you search her name and click on videos, several pop up immediately, all of which are engaging and inspiring. I particularly recommend Carol Ann's TEDx talk entitled, "Want to Make Meaningful Change? Start with Shakespeare." It is a timely and inspiring session that points to Shakespeare for guideposts towards becoming better, more aware people in the 21st century. Finally, I am in awe of Carol Ann's website, British History, Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. Carol Ann posts a new podcast each week, and the site is home to an impressive collection of over 50 podcasts with such intriguing titles as Shakespeare's London, The Temple, The Tower, and the Tavern, and the royal romances that rocked the monarchy. So I'd like to turn the program over to Carol Ann Lloyd so that she may continue her educational outreach as she shares insights into Shakespeare's stories and audience, his timeless themes, and his remarkable language with some of the creative and engaging activities that have become a part of her signature as a presenter. Welcome, Carol Ann, historian, Shakespearean, educator, and changemaker.
Thank you so much, Sue. It has just been a delight to reconnect with you. It was so wonderful to work with you at the Folger, and I really appreciate that introduction. And I am delighted to be with you here today, especially because it's Teacher Appreciation Week. And I am an enormous appreciator of teachers. And so thank you all. I know we have some teachers with us today. Thank you all so much for all you do. You are the real change makers, and we know that. So this afternoon, we're going to have some activities to have some fun with Shakespeare. And I do reiterate what Josh said. This is an interactive program, and you will have more fun when you participate. So please plan on participating in the polls. There will also be some time where I offer you the opportunity to fill in the blank with some of the more famous quotations. You can do that either just on your own, but if you feel brave and lively, go ahead and put your answers in the chat and we'll see how we all do. So I want us to really feel like we're interacting with each other, because in Shakespeare's day, the audience was very interactive. I'd rather you not throw rotten fruit at me, but otherwise let's be interactive together. So let's focus on the fun. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we are shaking up Shakespeare together. All right, so who is William Shakespeare? Just a very, very brief overview, because what we actually know is pretty brief. Of course, Shakespeare was born in 1564, sometime around April 23rd, possibly on April 23rd. That would be quite romantic and poetic, but we don't really know. We know he was baptized the 26th, so he may well have been born the 23rd. He married Anne Hathaway, she of a cottage, in 1582, and their daughter Susanna was born about 6 months later in 1583. Then a couple years later, twins Judith and Hamnet followed in 1585. And then we have the lost years. And people have come up with all kinds of stories to fill in those lost years. And I'll just leave that to your imagination. But we meet Shakespeare himself again in London in 1592. And that's where we'll really meet him and spend some time with him today, because by then we know from Robert Greene's pamphlet that he was making a bit of a name for himself. In fact, Robert Greene was not a fan and said some pretty derogatory things. And that's why it's easy for us to know that Shakespeare's making some noise, because he's irritating some of the more established university playwrights. So let's look at these two possible, well, we know one is a pretty definite representation of Shakespeare. On the left here, of course, we have the Martin Drewshout engraving from the first folio. It was published in 1623, and so that may very well be a good idea of what Shakespeare looks like. Although engravings certainly aren't at that time tremendous works of art that tell us really a photographic idea of what somebody looks like. His head almost seems to be sitting on a platter there. But it would have been approved by Hemmings and Condell, the two members of Shakespeare's company who gathered up all the plays and got the first folio published. And so that is a representation of what he looks like. Now, on the right, we have a more controversial possibility. This is the so-called Chandos painting, probably the most famous painting, possibly, not definitively, but possibly of Shakespeare. It's named Chandos because of a previous owner, the Dukes of Chandos. It was in their family, and it was given to the National Portrait Gallery in London. In fact, it is listed in their collection as their very first painting. They're of the opinion that it is of Shakespeare. Of course, if that's the first painting in your collection, you want it of somebody famous. So there you go. It's probably was painted sometime between 1600 and 1610 by George Vertue. And someone else thought it might be painted by John Taylor. So we really don't know that much about it, but it is thought to possibly represent Shakespeare. It's one of the more romantic possibilities of a Shakespeare portrait, and it is quite popular. Now, the end of his life, a monument was created to honor him. And of course, Shakespeare had retired to Stratford. He'd stopped writing plays. He was still involved with his London crowd. But when he died in 1616, on April 23rd, he had been in Stratford for a while. And of course, that's where he's buried. And so this funeral image, the funerary image, was thought to have been created after his death. And for a long time, it was thought it was probably done from maybe some sketches or maybe people who'd known him describing him. But Professor Lena Cohen-Orlin recently spoke at the Shakespeare's Birthday Trust, in fact, just last month for the Shakespeare Birthday Lecture. And her research has led her to believe that, in fact, this effigy for Shakespeare was, and the statue, the bust of Shakespeare, was created by Nicholas Johnson, and that he knew Shakespeare personally in life, and that she believes it's quite possible Shakespeare himself commissioned this bust to mark his burial place. And that was quite common at the time. So that would mean that Shakespeare made some of those decisions. The notion of having been represented with the quill, which we see is added, it's something that is refreshed, a new one is placed in, and the piece of paper on that cushion is actually a sign, not so much of a playwright, which was at the time not your highest level of society, but of an educated, a literary person. And so that's how he apparently, if Professor Orland is correct, and he commissioned it himself, that's how he wanted to be remembered. So we don't know for sure. And our focus today is going to be not so much on what he looked like, but what was happening on the stage. So here we have just a couple of ideas of how up close and personal people got with Shakespeare's plays. I think there's a misconception about Shakespeare being a very serious, you get all dressed up and you sit back in the dark in a theater. And maybe that's what people do now, but in Shakespeare's day, it was an up close and personal experience. You can see in the drawing on the left, this is one of the Walter Hodges' drawings of the globe, that people are very close to the stage. They were close enough, and those are the least expensive admission tickets, those right around the stage. And so those are the people whose voices were heard if they were happy about a play or unhappy about a play or a performance. The actors could definitely hear them and see what they were doing. So of course, without, everybody was in the same amount of light, so everybody could see each other. It was just a really different experience, and it was something that was very shared. On the right, you have a great picture, and I hope some of you have been to, and if you haven't had the chance and are able to go to the Globe in London, it's a wonderful experience where they try to recreate, and you can buy tickets to stand and watch the play, just like people did in Shakespeare's time. I have always bought a ticket for a seat, and I even pay the extra money for a cushion because that's what I want to do when I watch a play. But people they are able to stand through a play if you want. So you can really experience it as it was in Shakespeare's time. And the plays had to be entertaining. And that's one of the things I really want to emphasize. These plays had to catch your attention right off the bat and keep it for the period of time you were there. There was just too much else to do. And the crowd would lose attention very quickly if it wasn't interesting and fun and fast moving and violent and active and scary and hilarious. All those things were happening right in front of people, and it had to be like that. So there were good fights. There were a lot of slapstick comedy that we might think. It was just something that really had to be attention grabbing. In fact, they say that the fight master, the one we would now say a fight choreographer perhaps, but the fight master was considered by many in Shakespeare's time to be even more important than the playwright, because all the playwright did was write the words. But the fight master was the one that made sure the fights looked real. And given the feel of London at the time, when you were walking to the theater in that part of town on those afternoons, you may very well have seen a knife fight on the street on your way to the theater. And in fact, many of the people standing in the theater were armed with their knives or their swords. And so if it looked fake on the stage, people would call it out right away because they'd maybe just seen a real knife fight or a real sword fight. So it was very real, and it was really designed to grab people's attention. Now, we're going to start with our polls, a little game, and name that play. And I'll just say, when I was at the Folger working with volunteers, one of the most memorable experiences I had, someone told me she had gone into a classroom and had said she was going to, this was one of the volunteers, she was going to start helping the teacher work on some Shakespeare. And one of the students said, oh, Shakespeare, what could that possibly have to do with me? And believe it or not, that is exactly the question you want people asking, because it has so much to do with our lives today. I really don't think very much has changed in people's lives since Shakespeare's time. Yes, we have electricity and indoor plumbing, but a lot of the same questions and concerns and issues between people are the same. And so we're going to take a look at some sort of modernized plot lines from Shakespeare's plays. I'm going to invite you to vote for which play. I know some of them will be very obvious to you, and that's fine, but play along. Please, please participate in these polls. So here is poll number 1. College student returns to find it difficult to fit back into family routine. His mother is always on him about his behavior. His friends have changed. He's not sure what to do about his girlfriend. A message from his dad changes everything. All right, which play is that? Please vote, and then you can submit. So everyone, please vote. And Josh, when you see a bit of a critical mass, you can let us know. And thank you for running the polls.
No problem, absolutely.
Okay. Oh, I see some people in the chat as well, and that's a great place as well. If you're not able to do the poll, or if you'd prefer to put your answer in the chat, please go ahead and do that. Either way is fine. I see an answer in the chat. Make
So
sure I
we're
have
just
my
at about 60% of the audience voted, so I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay, can you put up the responses? All right, yes, you are correct, gang. It is Hamlet. But phrased in that way, it does have a real kind of a modern feel. And I think one of the things people imagine with Shakespeare, one of the things I used to hear all the time from students and from adults, is the idea that it's so far removed, it has nothing to do with me. Well, it turns out coming back from college and your family's acting weird is a pretty common phenomenon. All right, here we go. Female doctor heals the head of state and gains widespread praise, but the guy she likes is put off by that and disses her. She follows him to Europe to try to get him back. Again, if only 60% of you, I'm going to say maybe we can have a higher percentage. Everyone, please vote. Okay, take a look. The audience can't see the chat. All right. If you go to the bottom of your bar, you can open the chat right now. Actually, mine has moved to the top of my screen. It used to be at the bottom. Now it's at the top. And so there's a little area that has 3 little dots. And if I click more, I can open the chat up there. So with a screen up, it does move your bar around. So just take your cursor.
So yes, what Susan Campbell does, so chats can only be seen by panelists. We don't have chats visible to everyone.
I apologize.
You can, if you use the chat, we will see the result. We will see it. The panelists will see it, but you will not see the chat there. So just a clarification there.
I apologize. I didn't realize that. Sorry. I should always check because everybody's is different. Okay, so I will call out. If you put your answers in the chat, I will call them out. Okay, so here we go. Here's our new one. I don't see an answer to this one in the chat, but here we go. The majority of you thought it was Cymbeline. The next was All's Well That Ends Well, and finally Pericles. It is All's Well That Ends Well. All right. This is not a particularly popular play. Quite frankly, I'm not fond of it at all. But sometimes it's helpful to just play a little bit with some of the less popular, less well-known plays and see, what kind of ideas you can get generating. All right, here we go. Here's our vote 3. All right. Quick summary: war with France, conflict with the church, nobles rebel, death from poison. What play is that? All right. And again, if you want to put it in the chat, I will see it and I will read it out when we post the results. Please participate in the polls. All right. How are we doing, Josh?
We still got some votes coming in. They're still trickling in.
We'll
We're now getting over 60%.
Okay. That's great. That's great. I am so glad. And as an answer to the question, I did not mean Henry IV instead of Henry VI. All right. A number of people thought it was Henry VI, part 2. Few people thought it was Coriolanus. A few people thought it was King John. It is King John. All right. Now, war with France happens many times, both in Henry IV, Henry V. I mean, war with France is just kind of always there, and it is a big part of Henry VI. But King John is the one that this is about. And it's kind of interesting that Shakespeare would decide, if you're going to write a play, if you're Shakespeare and you're going to write a play about this period of history, why not write it about Richard the Lionheart? I mean, he was sort of a superhero considered at the time. Why write it about King John? It's just an interesting choice. It's not a very popular play. It's not done very often. He was a very bad king, and that really comes out in the play, which might have been one of the reasons that Shakespeare decided to write a play about a less popular monarch. You know, he couldn't question what was really happening at the time, but he could question the monarchy by writing about people from the past. And that may have been one of the reasons he wrote King John. One of the other things we get in King John is a possible glimpse. And I am not someone who is going to tell you that Shakespeare wrote his life into his plays, because a lot of times he certainly did not. But there's a moment in King John when Arthur's mother is mourning her son's loss, and she talks about how grief fills up the room of her absent child. And it is a really lovely speech. And I just want to read that. Grief fills up the room of my absent child, lies in his bed, walks up and down with me, puts on his pretty looks, repeats his words, remembers me of all his gracious parts, stuffs out his vacant garments with his form. Then have I reason to be fond of grief? It's just this lovely speech about the loss of a child, the loss of a son. And this was written right after Shakespeare's son died. And so we may get a glimpse. I'm not saying he wrote about his life, but we may get a glimpse of that humanity, of that sense of loss. And certainly I think losses like Hamlet's did sort of haunt Shakespeare throughout his life. And so we do get that in King John. All right, let's go on to another one. The next poll. Brother and sister each believe the other is dead. They get mistaken for each other. Chaos and hilarity follow. 3 choices there. Which one do you think that is? All right, hoping that you're voting. Don't see any votes in the chat for this one, but hopefully you're voting in the poll. There'll be one more after this.
All right, I think we've hit.
All right, let's see. Comedy of Errors, Twelfth Night, or Troilus and Cressida? Well, it's easy to bump out. Sorry, Troilus and Cressida. Both Comedy of Errors and Twelfth Night are about twins who are mistaken for each other. But this play is Twelfth Night. In Comedy of Errors, it's twin boys who, well, twin young men who are the servants and twin men who are the employers or the masters. In Twelfth Night, it's a brother and sister. And that idea of brother and sister and a lost twin, and this is about 4 years after Hamlet, one of Shakespeare's twins, passed away. And one of the things you'll see in Twelfth Night, there's a lot of chaos about people being mistaken for each other, and the couples get all jumbled. And then in the end, finally, the couples are all realigned in the way that they should be, blah, blah, blah. But really, one of the most powerful moments in that play is when the brother and sister, the twins, are reunited after believing the other is dead. That is an incredibly powerful moment, almost as if someone is imagining if his 2 twins could be reunited. And in fact, maybe the son wasn't really dead. I mean, it's just these moments do keep coming up. And so just be aware as you're teaching these plays, or if you're reading these plays, or as you're seeing these plays, there is a person, there are various people behind them. And I think sometimes those moments can give us just a little better understanding. Okay, here we go. Here's our final poll. So I'm really hoping we can get just about 100% participation in this one. A military man is jealous of his leader. So he convinces that leader that his great love has betrayed him. The leader falls for it. and decides that she, the love, should die. Okay, I'm hoping we'll get a really high participation. And again, if you want to put it in the chat, that's fine too. Oh, I have a very clever answer there. We'll talk about that. Yeah. All right. Okay. This is great. Othello, the winner by far. Richard III got a few, and Much Ado got almost no votes. However, this is a classic trick question because, and one of the answers in the chat was green monster. Yes, it is in Othello that we first get that notion of the green-eyed monster of jealousy. And remember how Robert Greene was so jealous of Shakespeare? Some people think perhaps green, I don't know. But there are two correct answers to this question. There are two plays that are based on this concept, that there is a military leader and he has a man working for him who's so jealous that he really tries to mess things up. Now, this play, exactly like this, of course, is Othello, but Much Ado is almost exactly the same story. All right. In the case of Much Ado, and they are military again, Don John doesn't try and convince the leader that his love has betrayed him. It's one of the leader's great friends. All right. So there's a little tiny shift, but overall, the storyline is so similar. And it's really interesting how Shakespeare takes this plot that's so similar. Military person, someone jealous, convinces to mess things up, that there's been a betrayal. The man believes the man, and the woman is sort of sacrificed. But there's a moment when Othello leans into tragedy and Much Ado leans into comedy, and things change. And I've heard Dr. Michael Whitmore of the Folger Shakespeare Library talk about this and talk about the language that for a long time, even in Othello, a lot of the language is comic, and it seems like Othello could work out to a certain point, and then all of a sudden things go badly. And in Much Ado, there's also a turning point. And I want to just briefly tell you, and then we're going to take a look at it. There's a moment in Much Ado, and you may remember, if you've seen it, it's frequently performed. And so you may have seen it. You may have seen Cam Branagh or Joss Whedon's version, or a variety of other versions. But when Claudio accuses Hero of betraying him very publicly at the wedding in front of all these people with just violently nasty language, it's just a horrible scene. And he storms off with the prince. I mean, the military leadership has stormed off sort of together, and Hero has collapsed. She might be dead. She's not, but it seems that she is. Benedict comes back and he meets with Beatrice. And that's where they've had this scene that's so funny, where they realize, they overhear the other person being talked about having loved them, and they so want to believe it. And so they've decided to be in love with each other. And so Benedict comes upon Beatrice right after this terrible scene with Hero and comforts her. And they express their love for each other, which they're both sort of surprised about. But there comes a moment when Beatrice asks Benedict, he says, well, I'll do anything for you. And she says, kill Claudio. And that insertion of death right into the middle of that love scene is something that Shakespeare's sort of famous for. Kill Claudio. And he says, oh, not for the wide world. And she says, you kill me to deny it. So I want to take a look. I'm going to turn the sound way up. We're not going to watch this whole thing, although it's great. But we're going to zip way ahead. Go zip even further ahead than that. Come on. We're going to zip to right there. All right.
And I love thee.
Use it for my love some other way than swearing by it.
Think you, in your soul, that Claudio hath wronged Hero?
Yea. As sure as I have a thought or a soul.
Enough, I'm engaged.
Okay, that's the moment. Benedict breaks rank and chooses to believe Beatrice, chooses to believe Hero. And at that moment, the play shifts. It's going to work out. And it does. And I think that moment is so important for a couple of other reasons too. One of the things he says to Beatrice is, think you in your soul that your cousin Hero has been wronged. And she says, as sure as I have a soul. Now, in Shakespeare's time, it was not a given that women had souls. So the fact that Benedict is actually acknowledging and accepting Beatrice has a soul, her soul is telling her the truth, and I am going to believe that truth. I am believing Beatrice, I am believing in Hero. At that point, the play changes. And so you have a very different outcome than Othello. And I think that is something really exciting we can share with students, for those of you who are teachers, and with other people, that sometimes considering a couple of plays together really enlarges our appreciation for very small moments when everything changes. So let's go on. We're going to have now, this will go a little quicker, we're going to have some quotables. All right. So I'm going to ask you if you would like to go ahead and put your possible responses in the chat, if you would like. What say you? So many times, more than 50 times throughout the works of Shakespeare, one character says to another, what say you? So I am now sort of asking the plays, what say you? Some of these quotes, let's see if you can really fill them in. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a moment. Music be the food of, fill that out in your mind, in the chat, however. Okay, I'm seeing a whole bunch in the chat here. Okay, yes. All right, we'll keep going. Yes, if music be the food of love. Now, here's a clue. Do you know what play that's from? You can put that in the chat as well. We're only going to take a moment. There's a clue, and that's a pretty clear clue if you look at the socks, right? Yes, that is Twelfth Night. All right, so it is. If music be the food of love, play on in Twelfth Night. So right off the bat in Twelfth Night, you get a notion of what the play is going to be about. Music, food, love, indulging in the senses. And it turns out to be a play very much about the senses. Okay, great. They get a little harder. There are more things in blank and blank, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Okay, there are more things. Oh, some of you are very, very quick typists and very impressed. Yes, a lot of right answers here. Okay. And it is, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Now, this is an interesting concept because when this play is written around 1600, there was a lot going on thinking about the idea of heaven and earth and the relationship between heaven and earth and the idea of an afterlife. You know, religious change was going on in England. We're Catholic, we're reformers, we're Catholic. Now we're calling ourselves Protestants. No, there are all these Catholics. And so religious chaos is ongoing and belief systems are being challenged. And so the idea of what happens in heaven and what happens on earth, and can ghosts appear to us? And of course, that does happen in Hamlet. And it sort of happens right off the bat in Hamlet. And you see Hamlet here in this little image, mourning Ophelia. And so that question of heaven and earth and who deserves to go to heaven and who's going to hell, and did Ophelia kill herself? Is she entitled to a burial in a church? All those things are going on. So yes, it's a play that has a plot line, but there are a lot of questions being asked. Okay, this is a great one, especially if you have students or other youth, because it's a pretty common phrase. He hath eaten me out of, he hath eaten me out of house and home. A lot of Shakespeare is not at all fancy. In fact, you might almost hear this and think, oh, I can't believe he's using that old cliche. Okay, the cliche started there, all right? But this, and here's the clue about what play this might be from, a character who might well eat you out of house and home. All right. There's one answer, one suggestion. It's the Merry Wives of Windsor. It's Falstaff. Yes, this is Falstaff. The play actually where Falstaff is being talked about. This is not his line. It's Mistress Quickly's line. And this is in Henry IV. Yes, that's right. I did say, and I understand Merry Wives because it is Falstaff. So it is that same character. He's continuing to eat people out of house and home. Okay. This line, this very short line is just, I think, one of the darkest lines in Shakespeare. It's very short, but it is just strips away humanity, and I think just shows the very worst parts of what we're capable of. Okay. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. And that is just such a dark moment. It's a dark moment in the play, and it's also a dark play, but just that line is so dark. I mean, when you think of the range of feelings from "he hath eaten me out of house and home," which is pretty funny, "if music be the food of love, play on," which is really enjoying life, to this, "as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport." Oof. So this, I already see some answers here. Yes, this is from King Lear. All right. And so pretty serious, pretty grim. All right. Now this, if someone says, "Oh, Shakespeare has nothing to do with us today, it's just all past," I would say, look at this. "Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's something, but it is tyrannous to blanket like a giant." All right, a couple of things coming in. All right. "Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength." Power would also work, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant. Now, here's a pretty good clue to what play that might be about. Yes, this is Measure for Measure. "Who would believe thee, Isabel?" is so haunting right now because it continues to be so resonant. There are people you can just see, oh yes, I will apply that to this person or these people today. So the notion of power and the misuse of power and the abuse of power is so relevant and haunting. For 400 years, have we made a lot of progress? I'm not sure. So yes, this is Measure for Measure. All right. Quickie here, "I wasted blank, and now doth blank waste me." Okay, yep, lots of "I wasted time, and now doth time waste me." Now, and there he is wasting time. Does anyone know which play this is from? Yeah. Some of you are right on top of this. This is great. Yes, this is Richard II. Now, Richard II is not about a great ruler, but Richard II has some of the most gorgeous poetry in Shakespeare. And one of the things it does, and you can see it in this very small line, but it happens throughout the play, sometimes in whole speeches, is the idea of chiasmus, or of two lines intersecting and reflecting each other. "I wasted time, and now doth time waste me." Waste time, time waste. And so that pattern, which is just encapsulated in that very short line. Also, there is the speech where Richard talks about the buckets going down, and my bucket goes down full because I'm the king, and Bolingbroke's goes down empty. And when they come up, his is full and mine is empty. Just over and over, the idea of things happen and then they are reversed. Richard is taken from the Tower to Westminster to be crowned. And then he is taken from Westminster Hall back to the Tower to be imprisoned. And then he's sent off to Pontefract instead. But that idea of Tower to Westminster and then Westminster to the Tower, that reflection, that chiasmus, which is in lines and speeches and whole scenes in the play of how much things change, and sort of the notion of the Wheel of Fortune, not the game show on TV, but the Middle Ages, the medieval idea of the Wheel of Fortune. You may be on top now, but you are going down. And that play was so haunting to Elizabeth II that she banned the scene where the king is deposed and didn't like it to be printed or performed. And so Shakespeare, with his language, is able to just evoke this sense of the impermanence of power, even royal power. It's Elizabeth I. Did I not say Elizabeth I? Yes. Queen Elizabeth I was just horrified by this play. And in fact, this was the play that the Earl of Essex commissioned years after it was out of date to be performed when he staged his rebellion. He thought Richard II would get people to rebel against the Queen. It did not, but she was pretty unhappy. All right. How blank mankind is, oh brave new blank that has such blank in it. All right, ideas here. All right, some of you know some of them, maybe not all the words, and that's fine. Yep. Okay, that first one, how beauteous. And I did see that, but not everybody knows beauteous. Oh, brave new world. And that, of course, that phrase has taken on a life of its own, that has such people in it. Okay. And this, and I see people already putting this of course is, yes, brave new world that has such people in it. And this is from The Tempest, as many of you are already saying. So the notion of language and the power of language comes very readily in a speech that I believe all of you are quite familiar with. We're going to just look at it for a moment. And we're going to just, let's just go.
This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand at tiptoe when this day is named, and arouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall see this day and live old age will yearly, on the vigil, feast his neighbours and say, tomorrow is St. Crispin's. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars, and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in their mouths as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, while any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day.
Okay, so there you go. And it's really easy to see why Winston Churchill as Prime Minister wanted that play made into a movie in some of the darkest days in World War II, because you watch that scene. This was with Olivier, of course, not Branagh, but you're just ready to go fight. It's so moving and so powerful. And this is the kind of language that can be so invigorating and can just really get people moving. And Shakespeare shows that. He shows this whole range of language. There's dark language and light language and inspiring language and discouraging language. And the range of the language is one of the most exciting things. And you can see it in productions like this one really change the mood of those people. And so it's a very powerful thing. All right. Now we're going to go on to talk about exit lines. Okay, so we're coming to the end. I know you're right. We're running out of time. Yes. So now we're going to talk about some of the ways that people say goodbye. And of course, here's this famous exit pursued by a bear by one of the very few stage directions in Shakespeare. It's often played for laughs, but you know, when you think about it, it's not a good ending, really. Exit pursued by a bear, you're not coming back. But anyway, what we're going to look at is the way characters say goodbye, the final words, the final moments of characters, and also the way plays say goodbye. So we know that in public productions at the end of the play, whether it was a comedy or a tragedy or a history, at the end of the play, often there would be a jig at the end and everyone would come back on and dance and happily. True, but we're going to look at the way the play says goodbye before the little jig happens. So let's look at some of the characters and see the ways that these characters say goodbye to the play, whether they're dying or just leaving, when characters have their final scenes. So I want you to just kind of look at those. These are some final moments from characters. See if you know, there are 4 of them. You know, if you want to suggest who you think they are, what play in that, we're just going to look very quickly at them and see who we got going on here. So the first one, which is quite famous, The Rest is Silence. Is anyone? Yes, that's right. Okay, I see a lot of that. The Rest is Silence is Hamlet. And, you know, in some ways, this really shapes Hamlet. It's a really perfect ending for Hamlet because the character, has spent so much time talking. He's talked to the ghosts, he's talked to his friends, he's talked to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, he's talked to the Queen, he's talked to his stepfather, he's just talked. And it's finally silence. So that's a really powerful way for that character to say goodbye. All right, here's another one, also dying, sort of. Thus die I, thus, thus, thus. Now am I dead, now am I fled. My soul is in the sky, tongue, lose thy light. Moon, take thy flight. Now die, 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 die. And I see a lot of you. This is Pyramus in Pyramus and Thisbe in Midsummer Night's Dream, the idea of a play within a play. And this group of actors having this really funny, way of expressing themselves and dying in this humorous way. And he keeps sort of coming back to life to speak some more as if he can't quite give up his moment. Okay. And demand me nothing. What you know. From this time forth, I never will speak word. Yes, Iago. That is Iago in Othello. And it's, again, a fascinating way. He stops talking after that. Iago, his words have caused all that trouble in Othello that we looked at a minute ago, because that one catapults itself right into tragedy and terrible deaths and awfulness. And it's pretty much all down to Iago's words. And then he stops talking. So it's a fascinating decision. He's still standing on the stage for a while, just quiet. So, and then finally, yes, as you have said, it is Macbeth, who interestingly dies off stage. A lot of characters do die on stage, but yes, Macbeth, our famous Macbeth, does die off stage, and then his head is brought in. So that's pretty dramatic. And then obviously we know who that is, but one of the most compelling and sort of haunting lines, of course, Julius Caesar, then falls Caesar, is as he's fighting back against all these would-be assassins, stab after stab after stab, when Brutus finally turns on him and he realizes the completeness of the betrayal of his friend, he does sort of collapse. And with very few words, he sums up all of that. So that's a really great, I think, farewell from a character. All right, so now we're going to look at the plays say goodbye before they jump on stage to, dance and sing and do their final thing. What are the final words of a play? How does a play say goodbye? All right, so this one you may not recognize. This is the ending of a play, and it starts with, "It is not the fashion to see the lady," the epilogue. So there's often a prologue and an epilogue, but in this case, the lady is doing the epilogue, but it is no more unhandsome than to see the Lord, the prologue going on. I am sure as many have good beards or good faces or sweet breath will, for my kind offer, when I make curtsy, bid me farewell. And yes, many of you got that. That is Rosalind and As You Like It. And that is the final bit of As You Like It. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, I saw a production and it ended differently. Productions do their own thing. I'm talking about the way the play is written, not necessarily how it's changed in performance. Okay, so yes. All right. Now, how about this? Which oft our stage has shown, and for their sake, in your fair minds, let this acceptance take. Yes, Henry V. Now, this is an amazing moment in Henry V because it follows, okay, you've got that whole St. Crispin's Day, and then against all odds, the English defeat the French, which really happened. And it really was just about as one-sided as Shakespeare makes it sound. And then Henry V is awarded the daughter of the French king and is promised that his sons will be king of England and of France, and everything looks so good. And it's this great moment. And then the chorus comes out and says, yeah, this is good, but everything's about to fall apart, as you know, because which oft our stage has shown. So here Shakespeare has his chorus speaking about those Henry VI plays that you've seen before. That was us too. And for their sake, in your fair minds, let this acceptance take. So he rips, it's like Shakespeare's ripping the rug right out from under you, just when you think, okay, we've defeated the French and everything's going to be fine now. But remember, Henry V's about to die and his baby son is going to be the king, and it ends badly. Okay, go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Now, this is not quite the final line, because if I gave you the final line, it has the actual play title in it. So, but many of you know, this is the line from Romeo and Juliet. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. But it is interesting here that Shakespeare is saying, go talk about this. Because the street violence, the just hum and drum of everyday violence, of the fear of the plague, of people fighting, of people can't even remember maybe why they're fighting, all of this is just exploded and really is destroying the youth, the next generation. And the final words are, go talk about this. And I think Shakespeare doesn't want to let us off the hook there. Okay, we came into the world like brother and brother. Now let's go hand in hand, not one before another. Absolutely, comedy of errors. When these twins are reunited in their funny way in this play, and comedy of errors is funny. It also begins to explore issues of identity and who you really are and what's happening, but then it's just very funny. And twins are confused for each other, and no one seems to think, wait a minute, I had a twin once. I wonder if he's in this town too. No, that never crosses anyone's mind. They're just all confusion. And then in the end, when all is revealed and they realize it, that's how it ends. We came into the world like brother and brother. Now let's go hand in hand, not one before another. And it's this wonderful resolution and this ending to this play. An earlier play, Comedy of Errors, is one of the earlier plays, but it's just a really fun ending. Now, when plays say goodbye, one of the things, and you see that, for my kind offer, when I make curtsy, bid me farewell, and let this acceptance take. Often the plays sort of ask for your applause. We really want you to know, audience members, we're ready now for you to appreciate us. And think about that. In Shakespeare's time, there's no curtain to fall. There are no lights to go out. There really aren't any clues that this isn't just a break, we're actually done now. Please start applauding us. And so sometimes the characters come right out and ask for it. And that happens in a really powerful way in Midsummer Night's Dream. Puck comes out and gives quite a lovely speech at the end. Now, as you know, sometimes Shakespeare is incorporated into other works. And one of my all-time favorites, and I know this is an old movie, so I'm sure I'm dating myself, but in Dead Poets Society, which the indomitable Robin Williams is in, playing the part of the teacher, John Keating, one of his students discovers the love of Shakespeare. And this is a play where he says, I know, the teacher, John Keating, is saying, I know that medicine and the law and business, those are all how we live, but poetry. And he specifically looks at Shakespeare. That's why we live. And so he gets his students to really appreciate the poetry and the joy of the Shakespeare plays, the humor of them. And one of his students is inspired and actually is in a play. And of course, this young man's father finds out and he's really upset about it. And so at the end of that play in the movie, this young man shares the final words in the play in a way that's really quite poignant. So let's watch that.
If we shadows have offended, think but this and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And as I am an honest puck, if we have unearned luck, now to escape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long. Else the puck a liar call. So good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends. And Robin shall restore amends.
Okay, so we'll just go on to, all right. So in that, and as that play is saying goodbye, and we're sort of coming to an end of our discussion, although we have plenty of time for questions, but as we think about the ending of that play as being one of the ways that the plays say goodbye to us, that Shakespeare in his way says goodbye to us, to an audience, to the future readers. Of course, he wasn't writing for us. He was writing for the people in his own time to get them to come to the theater so he could be successful. But as we think of the way that play says goodbye and some of the others, it's this way of asking for us, you know, give me your hands if we be friends. But it's also, again, about some of the hope, some of the genuine enthusiasm, not just for the play and the players, but also the members of the audience. Shakespeare was very concerned that the members of the audience had a good time, so they would come back and they would tell their friends, and the theater would continue to fill up with people. So we know that Shakespeare wrote many plays, and then as he retired, and you can see I have an image here of the Globe, as he retired back to Stratford and was writing and had some involvement still, was co-writing with some people toward the end of his life. And then the Globe that he had helped build, and when he became a shareholder, did burn down in 1613. And that act, some people believe, sort of pushed him into retirement. It was rebuilt, but he was, according to contemporaries, just never quite the same. And he did die in 1616. We're just past the 400th anniversary. But as a way of leaving, and I thought this was a lovely quote, then we shall be blessed to do your pleasure and continue friends. As we finish up, I would just encourage you to continue to explore and shake up Shakespeare by looking at him and the plays and your experience in new ways. One of the things I love to say about Shakespeare when I give talks for all kinds of other people, I'm starting to do some talks for businesses and more general audiences, and they'll start with, well, what could Shakespeare possibly have to do with me? Just like that student, what could Shakespeare possibly have to do with us today in 2021? Because like, we're going through a pandemic. Surely nothing could be like that. Maybe the plague. Oh yeah, all these problems with power and transfer of power. Like that's not a problem today. It's so resonant and so relevant. And so I would just encourage all of us to continue asking questions, asking Shakespeare's questions, and shaking up Shakespeare together. So I'm happy to answer questions now, but I do want you to know, if you have to leave now, you can reach me, Carol Ann, at carolannlloyd.com or at Shake Up History. And if you think of a question later, please reach out, because I would love to keep this conversation going. So right now, I'll stop the share and we can have some questions.
So thank you, Carol Ann. I think that was a lovely participatory presentation. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them either into the Q&A module or the chat. Thank you for your comments, everyone, from Randy Brandon
Yes.
and Diane Brandon and Savannah. Great fun. A comment I think from Phil Williams of Charlottesville, most interesting, showed how little Shakespeare I actually know, unlike others in the audience, apparently. Humbling, but good fun.
All right. Oh.
So we do have someone asking, can we do this again soon? Barbara is, so that's very nice. Have you written a book or other material on this from Randy and Diane Brannon?
Oh, what a lovely question. I'm really interested in doing so, but I have not yet. Right now, I'm working on a book about the Tudors, but Shakespeare's next. But thank you for asking. That's lovely. All right, let's see. I don't see anything in the Q&A. Are you watching? Oh, did something just pop up?
Yep, something just popped up. So Hannelore Noble asking, could you comment on the difference in interpretation between Laurence Olivier and some of the other actors who portrayed his characters?
Okay, yes. Often the portrayal depends on the situation at the time, what the particular director is looking for, what he's going for. Every production is an interpretation. And so there is no one clean. Even when Ken Branagh decided to do all of Hamlet and not cut any lines, which was very unusual, that was a decision, that was an interpretation. So for example, when Laurence Olivier played Henry V in that production that was put on during World War II, it was the bright and shiny Henry V. Every moment of that production was bright and shiny. And Henry V was never dirty from the war, and he was always on a white horse, I think. And that was the point. It was in the middle of a war. Now, when Ken Branagh did the production, and we saw that wonderful moment of the Crispin's Day speech, but that production also includes, which the Olivier does not, the Harfleur speech, which is horrific. And the threats that Henry V, this great honorable king, the way he is threatening to put your babies on spits if you don't surrender is horrible. So Shakespeare's plays are generally incredibly complicated. There are no all good, all bad characters. So in the Henry V production, for example, Olivier plays Shakespeare's Henry V as all good. Branagh plays him as good and bad. So sometimes those decisions are made by production, by producer. Honestly, the government was funding that one during World War II, and they wanted a particular look for their King Henry. All right. So often the director and the money behind the production makes a difference. Olivier does just a delicious version of Richard III. So it's not like Olivier is always bright and shiny. His Richard III is just, you almost see him twisting an evil mustache in that. It's really fun. He really has some fun with it.
All right, so some other questions have come in, I think, in the time. So Dana Ivy asks, what is your favorite Shakespeare play and why?
I have many, but I have to say my favorite is Much Ado About Nothing lately. Because I was asked at Smithsonian, I was asked to do a talk about Shakespeare's women and the women in Shakespeare's plays. And so I really started looking at that. And Beatrice, I love Beatrice because she has all the language in the world. She has all the language she needs to have an opinion about Benedict, change her mind about Benedict, have another opinion about Benedict, have an opinion about Claudio, to then have some doubts about Claudio and express those doubts about Claudio. And then I guess come around to liking Claudio again. She has all the language she needs for all the experiences she wants to share. And there's that moment where Benedict decides to believe the women. I just think that is revolutionary. in that time. And so I love that play. I love other plays, and I'm sure, it's a switch here. And if you ask me in a month, there may be something else. But right now, I'm just really in love with Beatrice and Benedict, especially Beatrice.
So Phil Williams, I believe in response to your mention that you're writing a book on the Tudors, what about the Tudors?
Okay, so my book is Tudors by the Numbers. So for example, we think we know the Tudors. Yeah, Henry VIII, 6 wives. Yeah, Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots, or Mary, whoever it was. Yeah, the Tudors, glorious, whatever. But there are a lot of things that if we really run the numbers, we find we maybe didn't know quite as much as we thought. For example, did you know that 42% of the Tudor reign was under the rule of a reigning queen? Before the Tudors, 0% of any dynasty had been ruled by a woman. After the Tudors, 0 dynasties had 0 women. Every dynasty had at least 1 female ruler after the Tudors. So when we look at the numbers like that, it gives us a new perspective on the Tudors. And that's what I'm working on right now, Tudors by the Numbers.
Great. So our next question is from Gail Robinson, who asks, I see a lot of humor in Macbeth. Do you agree?
Yes, actually, there is quite a bit of humor in Macbeth, and there are some really interesting things that are happening at the time, and Shakespeare's making a little fun of the idea of equivocation. So during the time of Macbeth, Macbeth was being written and performed, which was around the time of the Gunpowder Plot, which was a very tense time, because one of those things where the plot didn't happen, but what could have happened, the government was using what could have happened if they'd succeeded to make it sound even more terrible, because who knows what could have happened. So there was a lot of unrest, and Shakespeare sort of plays with that in Macbeth. So he has the porter and the knock jokes that are starting with the porter. And there's this just kind of underlying poking fun at the absurdity of that kind of desperate movement that, yes, I think certainly is really rich in that play. And again, Shakespeare doesn't say, okay, I'm going to write a tragedy, so it's just all going to be dark and sad. Most of the tragedies have quite a bit of humor, and most of the comedies have quite a bit of, the threat of death is really nearby, nearer than we realize in a lot of those comedies. So Much Ado, hero could have died. In Comedy of Errors, which is such a silly slapstick, there's a character that is threatened with death if he doesn't come up with the right amount of money. I mean, there's just, in a lot of the comedies, there's a threat of death. So it's very mingled. But yes, I do think Macbeth has its funny moments, definitely.
So we're just about running out of time. So I'm going to get to one last question. So
Okay.
so this is from Randy and Diane Brandon saying, we've seen the big 4, 5, 6 a lot. When we've tried to see a history or two, we've left at halftime. What's the attraction of his histories?
That's a good question. One of the things, and it looks like, for example, Henry VI, parts 1 and 2 and 3, and we don't even think they were written in that order. We think it's part 2, part 3, and then later part 1. But that was what people knew. So people knew history plays. They knew the history that was being acted out. That was familiar to them. History plays actually came into existence during the reign of Elizabeth I and were heavily promoted by the Queen and by Francis Walsingham, who formed a company called the Queen's Men to go around the country and perform patriotic history plays like Henry V, only not Shakespeare's version with that terrible Harfleur speech, just a really happy Henry V play. So Walsingham had his players going around promoting England and Elizabeth, England, Elizabeth, England, Elizabeth, not Mary, Queen of Scots, England, Elizabeth. And so history plays really came into vogue during Elizabeth's time. So there was an emphasis on them. They were asked for at court. So they were appealing in that way. Now, that may not be as resonant with us, and some of them are better than others. I doubt you leave at halftime during Henry V, because that's a great play. Some of them are just better than others. But at that time, they were pretty popular, yes.
Great.
that
Well,
answers.
thank you for taking. Oh, well, thank you for taking some time to answer those questions. I am now going to introduce our executive director of the English Speaking Union, Karen Karpovich. Karen.
Hi, Carol Ann, and fellow Beatrice and Benedict fan, because when he asked that question, as you said, much ado was coming out of my mouth also. Definitely Beatrice and Benedict, one of the greatest characters in Shakespeare, one of the great love characters in Shakespeare. Thank you so much, Carol Ann. It was wonderful. And I just want to remind all our teachers out there about the CEU credits. That's a great opportunity. I think this is a great learning experience about teaching Shakespeare and getting people to love Shakespeare. And your passion and your knowledge is obvious. Thank you again. And I do applaud you. And I do reiterate what one of our audience said, please come back. And if you want to come back and talk about the tutors, do that also. So thank you again. I want to thank Karen Blair Brand and the Central Florida branch for putting this together. It was amazing. And we look forward to seeing you next week, which is a little bit of a change. We have a journalist on tap, Joby Warwick, who was a national security correspondent from the Washington Post. And as many good journalists, I don't know if it's a he or she, I'm sorry, but they have a novel in them. And we're going to hear about a novel called Red Line, which is going to be a bit of a different kind of venue, but I think it's going to be an interesting talk again. So come back next Wednesday at 4 o'clock to see that. The season is winding down, but it's been an amazing season. And I do want to thank everyone, especially the branches who curated these programs, which have been very popular and very, very successful. So thank you all again. And I do want to mention the fact that we are a membership organization. And if you're not a member, please become one. When you fill out the survey about the event, you have the opportunity of signing up for membership in the ESU. Thank you all again and have a lovely evening.
Karen, we're the Central Pennsylvania branch.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Not Central Florida.
I am so sorry.
That's okay. I just want my branch and members to know that from Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Forgive me. Okay, have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.